ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, college football fans across the nation and around the world. I forgot to do that whirly twirl last week, but Awesome Ward filled in for me on that, and I appreciate that. That's why he's there as a co-pilot. If I miss that one button to push on final approach, he saves the day. Awesome Ward, welcome back again to the Tim May podcast, my man.
Thank you for having me.
And I really do like how you shoot those finals when I put you in charge, man. You do a really good job. Just both on engine control and the yoke, but I digress.
Whatever those are.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, exactly. That's a co-pilot for you. You just learning. What's this button?
I'm just attacking the beverage cart.
Yeah, there you go. Flight attendant. Almost said stewardess. That gets you fired now, doesn't it? If you say stewardess. But I digress again. Awesome. Ohio State's headed into this 4-game gauntlet. And you know what? It's a more of an interesting schedule than we thought it was going to be 8-9 weeks ago. Most experts thought it was going to be. My guest this week, Joshua Perry of the Big Ten Network, formerly of Ohio State football fame, a linebacker on that 2014 national championship team. But like he said, he picked Michigan State last in the Big Ten East this year, like a lot of people did. I kept trying to warn people, especially after I talked with Mel Tucker, that, they had a major makeover of that team. And I think even Michigan realizes that now, is that not only is that team pretty talented compared to even a year ago, but it plays to the end of the game, which we'll get into that maybe Michigan week on how Michigan doesn't seem to play to the end of the game. You don't get credit for the third quarter. You get credit for what the final score is. But I digress. Bottom line is, though, this is made for an interesting wrap up to the Big Ten East race with Ohio State playing at Nebraska, which is desperate for victory of some sort, some meaningful victory in the Scott Frost era and the Adrian Martinez era, for that matter. We'll talk about that in a minute. You and I will. And then Purdue, is any team more improved than Purdue? Maybe Wisconsin is over the last 6 weeks in the Big Ten. Then Ohio State hosts Michigan State and then plays at Michigan, which clearly in the Jim Harbaugh era is going to be desperate for victory. I talked about this a long time ago, that the two road trips that really were intriguing to me on the Ohio State schedule were at Nebraska and at Michigan, because you're going to have two coaches desperate to prove themselves in one point that a guy can beat a team he's not supposed to beat. And then in Jim Harbaugh's case, is going to be to prove, for want of another term, that Michigan should be considered among the elite. So this next month, the games in November are the ones they remember, as the old saying goes. It is a pretty good looking month looking forward, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't know that I completely agree with the first part, because we've had these conversations about Scott Frost in Nebraska and trying to get a signature win and propel them. And all I can ever remember are just Ohio State blowouts. And I know there've been a couple mixed in that were more competitive, but I'm not expecting a heck of a lot on Saturday morning at 11 a.m. from Scott Frost and the Huskers. But to be candid and fair, I didn't think that James Franklin was going to dial up that kind of performance on Saturday night that he did in the Horseshoe. Maybe I should have, but I didn't, and I'm not going to pretend the other way. But Nebraska has a very clear difference between what James Franklin and Penn State had, which is they are nowhere near as talented. They've never proven that they can dial up in a big game setting. They're even more poorly coached in clutch situations than James Franklin and Penn State. So I know that there's a lot of key tests waiting for Ohio State at the end, and you can't fast forward through Saturday. But of everything that's left, I think Nebraska is the least entertaining out of all of them in my mind.
It's called a build-up. It's not, you don't go up a ramp at the top of the ramp. You start up the ramp. So this is a ramp. But number two, they found ways to lose games in the fourth quarter is what stands out to me about this team. I think this team is better than it has been from a competitive standpoint. I'm talking about Nebraska, but they keep finding ways to lose games just like the good old days, and that's what's intriguing about this. And, I'm just trying to add a little bit of pregame hype in there. Just the fact that you do sense of,
you don't have to always agree.
Yeah. Yeah, I know, but maybe the desperation part is already over. Maybe this is the denouement. You may be exactly right. And like you just talked about a while ago, though, I don't think we were that wrong about Ohio State versus Penn State and James Franklin. If Ohio State had just gotten one more touchdown in the red zone, then instead of running into a mud puddle down there and settling for field goals, it would have been that basic semi-blowout, if not blowout victory. I mean, I think the defense, for the most part, did its part. But offensively, and we're going to talk about that after I come back from my little talk with Joshua Perry. But, clearly Urban Meyer's got to go into the offensive room this week, put the hood up and figure out these the red zone problems that they had the other night. And occasionally from time to time have plagued this team, maybe because it has too many plays at its disposal, or I'm going to opine, perhaps they tried to prove a point that they didn't really need to prove. But you're intrigued by that, aren't you?
Well, I don't think they'll invite Urban Meyer into that offensive meeting room, but
no.
Ryan Day will definitely we'll look at 5 trips into the red zone that don't end in a touchdown, and be looking for answers to what happened there. And one of them, as we talked about after the game, and I've asked Justin Zwick about this on Monday at Roosters, just kind of about the throw from C.J. Stroud and the miss to Olave. Could Olave have adjusted the route? Was Stroud maybe tired from running down the field on a bizarre non-call on when Penn State runs down a touchdown and loses his legs? I mean, they missed the play. It happened, and C.J. Stroud would have wanted the throw back, but that's another one that could have changed the outcome.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. That's the play. That's what I'm
close
talking about.
They were.
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't think that Ryan Day will go in there panicked about it. It's a clear thing that they have to improve on. And the big difference, obviously, this week for Ohio State as compared to week 2 after Oregon or 2018 against Purdue when they had similar red zone issues, is that they weren't undone by what happened on the defensive side of the football. It was a more complete performance, even without, they still kicked field goals and got points out of it, which you take, you don't want. That's not the ideal outcome if you're Ryan Day, and he's very aggressive and is going to continue to push the envelope. But, I think it is worth a reminder that Penn State was very talented,
yes,
certainly trying everything they could to get an upset win and turn the tide around for their program. It was that just made for a weird dynamic where Ohio State could have easily won that game by a lot more. They had their own problems, but Penn State deserves some credit for creating a few of them as well. It's just that part was a little bit mixed bag, but you don't ever, turn your head and scoff at a 9-point win over Penn State.
Yeah. A 2-score win. And that's what I talked about, when we did our rapid reaction. Yes, you want more than a field goal, but when you get field goals, those are still points. Those are still scores that the other team has got to deal with. And bottom line, Noah Ruggles has been perfect. I mean, knock on wood, I'm sure he does every day. Like he said, the next kick's the most important one. But wow, that guy transfers in from North Carolina and has delivered the goods. You got to agree on that, don't you?
Yeah, he seems like he is definitely all business. We've only got to talk to him a couple times since he's been on campus, but
yeah,
he appears to take that craft very seriously, and he has delivered every time Ohio State's needed him. And they never needed him more than in a tight 1-score game in the fourth quarter against Penn State, trying to put it away. And that may have been the least effective looking of his kicks, but it went through the uprights.
Yeah,
and that's all that matters.
That's all that matters, man. Just like a hockey goal, if it bounces off the goalie and off the goal post and into the thing, or if it goes right through, it's the same point. I agree with you 100%. I'm just curious if Ruggles ice cream has come through yet for him. You know what I mean, from an NIL standpoint. But maybe we'll get into that in a minute. Probably won't. But hey, let's get to my interview with Joshua Perry. He's been on this podcast before a while ago, but he's fast becoming one of the more popular watches out there when it comes to college football, especially on the Big Ten Network. He's quite opinionated, but his opinions are backed up with pretty good research and for the most part, facts. And I've always enjoyed my conversations with Joshua Perry. So let's go right to that interview. And as promised, ladies and gentlemen, a command reappearance on the Tim A podcast by Joshua Perry. Perry, welcome back, my man.
How we doing?
Pretty good, man. I'm semi-retired. You're doing the opposite of semi-retired. You're overhired. I don't know if you agree with me or not, but where people know you now big time and you're becoming more popular by the moment. Matter of fact, I think you just picked up 10 more followers in the last 5 seconds. It's on the Big Ten Network. you're one of those experts out there telling people you may think you saw this, but this is what you really saw. You know, you're one of those guys, right?
That's what I try to be. And I also like to admit when I saw it wrong, so I can maintain my credibility. I'm not necessarily a die on the hill type of guy in this business, because the more information that we get, the more our opinions should evolve.
Yeah. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm telling you, Florida was good at the beginning of the year type thing, but
yes,
but that's just an example. Hey, real quick, let's, give people a little taste of coming out of, you got to watch Ohio State, Penn State. Ohio State's first real test since Oregon, in my opinion, and it definitely was a test. But what's just your overall view of Ohio State now, 8 games into the year, after that win at home, 33-24 over Penn State? What's your take on Ohio State at this point?
Yeah, I mean, they're a really good football team, and I think that we're starting to realize and understand that. And I haven't watched back the full game. I watched Ohio State's defense. I haven't watched their offense yet against what Penn State was putting out there. But I know a lot of people have some questions about the offensive performance because it wasn't, 50 points and 600 yards like you saw against some of the lower competition. And I think that was to be expected. I mean, it was 466 yards, and CJ threw the ball pretty well against the Penn State secondary. That's probably the best Ohio State's going to see, at least until they would make it to a CFP type of situation. And I thought it was really good for Ohio State to have challenges and things to not be easy offensively and to have to maybe dig a little bit deeper and perform well. Defensively, it's really unique because I think Penn State's offense is better than what the statistics would show. In the game that they played against Wisconsin at the beginning of the year, and we see the way Wisconsin's defense is playing, and if you haven't seen it, I would say that they're really freaking good. They had some challenges there, and they didn't run a ton of offensive plays. Wisconsin dominated the ball that game, and so their output was kind of low. You look at the game against Iowa, obviously that one is it's going to skew the statistics simply because they didn't have their starting quarterback in there, and that was another good defense. Illinois was an aberration. Penn State is a solid football team. Getting into some X's and O's for you, what I see is really unique is this change in Ohio State's defense, because guys are playing faster. I think they understand the concepts a lot better. They're creating turnovers. They're scoring on defense, all the things that you would want, but they're still giving up plays. Yeah. And it's not killing them right now, but it's something that sticks out in my mind.
Yeah.
When you dive into the tape, the thing that stands out to me the most is that Ohio State struggles to get sacks and pressures on the quarterback when they only rush 4. And when you're running a cover 2 defense, that becomes an issue because it's good for underneath coverage. You can get strong in the flats. The corners can get jams on outside receivers, but there's only 2 deep zones. So if anything's able to make it down the field, it gets really soft. And that's what happened to Ohio State a lot of times when Penn State was able to just kind of throw in that 10 to 15 yard range. And so that's something I'll be looking at. When they get aggressive and they want to get pressure, they're blitzing. A lot of times they're sending 6 and they're running what we call hot coverage, which is a 2 underneath 3 deep coverage. We ran it when I was at Ohio State.
Yeah.
And it's basically a middle finger to the defensive backs if you can't hit the quarterback, because there's so much space out there. And, you're basically having to break on the football as soon as it's thrown and hopefully make a tackle in space. It's tough, but they've been able to come up with big plays out of that. So I'm looking at this evolution as something that's really unique because plays have been there, but also Ohio State has created a ton of havoc, and that's exactly what you want out of a defense.
I was going to say, I haven't seen Ohio State blitz this much in a long time. I mean, because they are having to augment, without a doubt. And the thing about it is they've had some pretty good blitzes, over there, especially but if the blitz doesn't get there, like you just said, that little soft zone, man, is like easy pickings. And at least it was, driving down the field, you still got to get into the red zone and score. But let me ask you this is this a troubling stat? Ohio State got into the red zone, I think. I'm trying to remember the stat. I think it was 6 times, scored 1 touchdown, kicked 4 field goals. And then, of course, you remember that 4th down play, the pass to Chris Olave, which came up short because C.J. Stroud thought he was going to stop at the goal line because of the way the defense was reacting. But Olave was wide open, kept going, and it looked like, Tim May throwing the ball, you know what I mean? But is the red zone against a good defense like that? Is the red zone problem the other night troubling? If you were a coach, would that be troubling to you? I think it would be, but go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always troubling, and you want to make sure that you're scoring 7 instead of 3. Defenses call those 4-point plays, and you'd like to walk away saying that you saved 4. And so Penn State, that's actually been a point of emphasis for them. And that goes back to the beginning of the season. They have a bend but don't break type defense, and they're one of the best red zone defenses in the country. Yeah. And so it's going to be a big challenge for Ohio State. And you can even look at how terrible they were against Illinois, giving up all those rushing yards. They were all given up in the field because once Illinois got in tight, it was really hard for them to actually score points. 9 overtimes is proof of what happens when you get Penn State in a small area trying to score. Yeah. And so for Ohio State, I think it's 2 things. It's number one, I think that the offensive line had more struggles than they had all year. And that is very apparent when the field gets in tight, because you see defenses now bring more people close to the line of scrimmage, and it becomes a little bit harder to run the football in those scenarios. And then I think the other thing too is just I'm not exactly sure that Ohio State has totally unleashed everything it can offensively. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because you got a young quarterback who you don't want to give it entirely too much to, and you want to play your best ball at the end of the year. So that'd be interesting. Now, the one thing that I say would be an immediate fix, and this is something that works out in the field, but especially in the red zone, is when you have a quarterback who is a willing participant in the run game. It's very difficult to win the numbers battle when the field is that short. There's just not enough space. And so lining it up and trying to knock people around isn't as efficient than when you can say, let's just get +1 in the run game and have a guy who can make plays. And it doesn't have to be the JT Barrett, be a fullback. It is more so get the yards that are there and then slide. And I don't think Ryan Day is a coordinator who is a quarterback run guy. And CJ wants to be a pocket passer. So there's going to be something that has to give there. And it's probably 4 to 8 chances a game where he runs the ball. It's all it needs to keep a defense kind of on edge a little bit. But that is one thing immediately that improves Ohio State's ability to score in the red zone.
Yeah. I mean, you know what? The other night you could see it. I mean, you could see what a difference that would make. And then you remember back in 2019 when Justin Fields ran the ball several times quite effectively against Penn State, and it just opened things up in that game. And heck, I even had Graham Rahal, the IndyCar driver, text me in the middle of the game. He goes, why won't this guy won't run? Why don't they run CJ Stroud? It would change everything. Yeah. And I truly believe that also. I mean, it would change everything in both sides. And, like you just said, though, you got a first-year starting quarterback. You want to bring him along, but you don't want to oversaturate him. He's got enough of a challenge, just understanding what's going on in front of him to begin with, right?
Yeah, and I think Ryan and the staff are smart enough to understand that coaches are most often quarterback killers when the quarterback isn't playing well. It's typically because they're asking too much, or they're forcing a square peg into a round hole, or the inventory is too big. Right. And so I think Ryan has the self-awareness to let CJ naturally progress. And then once he starts to see it come together with all the concepts that are in, he'll start to add more. And that's the way to do it. And if you're Ohio State, especially the way that the schedule has built, it's worked out for them to do it that way, because you haven't had to worry about, the next opponent is going to be this matchup team where, we're going to have to be our best, and we're probably going to have an expanded inventory. It's been some lesser competition where you can really grow into it. Now, as we head into the latter part of this year, there are going to be some matchup opponents on the schedule where you're going to have maybe some more inventive scheme, and you're going to have to say, quarterback, go out there and make some daggone plays. And I think they're capable of it, but right now this is the proper build for them.
Daggone. Yeah, I guess they probably do say, go out there and make some daggone plays.
Yeah, it's typically a word that starts with the letter F.
Yeah, exactly. But you digress just like I do. But, I was going to say the flip side of that is they did make, I think it was 5 or 6 trips into the red zone, only came up with 1 touchdown. But, Noah Ruggles has not missed a field goal or an extra point so far. And I'm sure every time somebody brings that up, he knocks on wood somewhere. But it did show that the potential for that game to be a bigger score than it was for Ohio State was there, right? I mean, as opposed to they weren't getting stymied at the 50-yard line. So, how do coaches take, that kind of, do they just take that as this is how good we can be if we just fix this one more thing? Or is that a major concern, red zone, going into the last 4 games, you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a double edge where there's a heightened awareness of what they have to do in the red zone, but you can also sit there and say, all right, we went a little bit clunkier than we would have liked to. You add 20 to the score and it's a completely different outlook and people are talking differently. I'm a firm believer that these are the type of games that make you better is when you go out there against an opponent that has better talent than what you've seen and things are a little bit sloppy and it doesn't always go your way, but you're able to come away with a pretty comfortable win. At the end of it, you can really build off of that. And one of the things that Luke Fickell used to like to do after a game like this was coach really, really hard because you're feeling good about a big win, a night game that was on national TV, but you also look at the tape and say, all right, we got to clean some things up. And so you can get on guys. You know, it's a lot easier to be critical and it's a lot easier to coach hard and to receive coaching when you're winning rather than that being, you know, even a way tighter margin or a loss, which would have been probably the end of the world in Columbus. If, you know, houses would have gone for sale and, you know, there would have been people still drunk this Monday morning as we record, drinking away their sorrows. They're not dealing with that. And so you can go and you can prepare and you can get better.
Yeah. Yeah. But aren't you in the real estate game? So, I mean, that would really have, you know, maybe a little bit of a spark for the market. I mean, more houses up for sale. I mean,
sure.
Just inventory, you know what you guys are calling it, inventory.
Yeah.
So you would have been a beneficiary of that. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, that's exactly it. I would have been calling people, hey man, you know, the Bucks lost again. It might be time to think about a new locale. I know you were talking about Florida or Arizona. I can make that happen. Maybe go to Texas. Tim May, you know about Texas.
Yeah. There's plenty of places to build a house in Texas. I know that for a fact. But I digress, just like you just did. Bottom line too, though, is, you know, there were a couple of times, quite a few examples on Saturday night where I thought Penn State's defense snookered Ohio State's offensive line. I mean, you know, Ohio State with those double teams coming off, you know, zone and then reaching to the second level and stuff. And there were guys, it's almost like they were setting them up to take advantage of a double team and a guy just shooting by a guy before he could reach, you know, and get to him and stuff. And I that could be an eye opener for offenses coming down the street, couldn't it? I mean, I got to take coming down the street.
I got to take a look at the tape on that because what is mind-boggling to me is that you, as an offensive lineman, you are coached to not climb on the double team until you have secured the down lineman. Like that's the guy who can make the play immediately. On the second level, the expectation is CJ Henderson, Travion Henderson, Mayan Williams can make a guy miss or he can run through a tackle, right? So the guy with his hand in the dirt is the one to block. And I'm not exactly sure what was going on there, but it was almost like, you know, they were hand help and then it was get to the second level right away. And guys were just, you know, they're falling off blocks and they're making tackles at the line of scrimmage. Hadn't seen it before. So maybe it was just an aberration and something that, you know, the game plan was such and the way that Penn State was playing was such that was an opportunity. But it's something that if it pops up again is going to be a real issue.
But you played defense big time. You played big time defense. There's some defense that do a good job of what I call double teaming an offensive lineman. You know what I mean? And that's what, and then you put it in a quandary, that guy, and you saw it happen to Thayer Munford a few times the other night. I'm talking about people watching the game where he was kind of like left blocking nobody and they had penetration, you know, and it was like, you know, it was interesting. Like his guy, the guy lined up seemingly over him, didn't come like he thought he would. They double team like Nicholas Petit Frere. And then all of a sudden Thayer looks to the inside and the guy on the inside has already shot the A gap between him and Luke Whippler, who has been engaged with a defensive lineman. And boom, you got a guy standing there not blocking anybody. And they got two guys in the defensive backfield, you know, I mean, offensive backfield. And you kind of go, you can't run against that. You know what I mean? That's something. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, it's definitely different, but it goes back to kind of, you know, your base football where you got to make sure that guy is secured. Like if he's gone, he's gone. But if you're not sure, stay on. Yeah. Right. Because the guy on the second level is way less dangerous than the guy who is right there to immediately make the play. It almost looked like a trap block, right? Yes. Where you let the guy penetrate. He thinks he's going to make the play and then he's getting whammed. Yeah. But there was no trap on there. So it was really interesting watching it.
Yeah, the trap was not set. Kind of like the reason I have mice occasionally. You know, we live out here on a farm and stuff. Sometimes you got to set the trap and then put another one. When he backs off of that, he gets his legs caught. You know, either way, you got the mouse.
You got to get a cat. You don't have to worry about the
trap. Dude, we got this is a true story. We got 4 cats because we inherited one from my daughter. And that's 4 cats to me is 4 too many. but number two, because our black lab's the real star in our house.
Yes.
But none of them chase mice. But we inherited a chicken from 2 months ago or so, showed up at our place. I never knew chickens go after mice like this chicken does. And,
Really?
I'm thinking about bringing her indoors. No, I'm just joking. By the way, speaking of that, my wife and my black lab saved her. A hawk came down and came after her the other day. And my black lab went running at him and ran the hawk off. But
you live in the wilderness. This isn't a
no,
farm.
I don't. Actually, there's 50 homes going up right next door to us right now. I mean, I think all the wildlife's looking for refuge in our little 4.5 acres. Or as we call it, too few acres. Hey, Let's jump ahead now. So the biggest lesson you think coming out of this game for Ohio State is there's some tough nuts down the road, number one. Yeah. And number two, you passed this test. You didn't pass the first test of the year against Oregon. Major changes were made. What I did like about this Ohio State defensive performance is it did show a lot of the tools that are in their toolbox now that they're willing to use, right? I mean, there's still definitely some tightening needs to go on, but you got to be impressed a little bit with that they do have a deeper toolbox, don't you, Josh?
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that has emerged over this year is that, it was funny, some of the discourse from early on after the Oregon game, like people were so ready to say that Ohio State didn't have the talent to play good defense. And I'm sitting here like, I know recruiting rankings aren't everything, but I mean, that's a big part of the equation. And Ohio State knows how to evaluate guys. Like, I don't understand where that thought process came from. In my mind, it was always that they were playing a step too slow and that, maybe they weren't fully understanding what the assignment was. And once they got that figured out, it changed. And like I said, there's still plays that they're giving up. But the thing that's different now is they're getting the sacks and the tackles for loss, and they're creating the turnovers. They're forcing teams into bad situations offensively, and they're scoring on defense. It's a huge deal to be able to score on defense. And so, I mean, we're starting to see guys now. Like linebacker room is really thin, but a guy like Steel Chambers, who was unceremoniously ejected from the game on Saturday, that dude is really good. I think he's a very good player. Yeah. Burke is a really good player. The guys on the interior of the defensive line, that is the strength right now. Yeah. Like there are some playmakers out there, and I think it only continues to get better the more reps they get. Yeah.
And I think Ronnie Hickman's been the Rocket.
Ronnie the Rocket.
Yeah, Ronnie the Rocket, man. I'm telling you, I keep referring to he and Steel Chambers, to him and Steel Chambers as they're almost like two guided missiles now. Ohio State shoots at people that they didn't have, that weren't obvious back in the first 2 games of the year, even though Ronnie Hickman made a hell of a lot of plays in that Minnesota game, for example, but and against Oregon. But I mean, these guys are playing big time. But like you just said, all of a sudden these guys were overrated in the recruiting, et cetera. You always look slower when you're not moving. I don't know if you know that or not. A tree looks slower than a guy walking past it.
Is that something you learned in physics class?
No, I just learned it. I mean, I just like that narrative about Ohio State's defenses, even back when you played it, even before that, is that, the Florida game gave way back in 2006, gave people the wrong, you're trying to play a soft little zone. I'm talking about 2006 against Florida, Ohio State was, and you're always going to look slower than the guy running by you because you're not moving. I mean, right. That enhanced that narrative. The SEC has all the speed, and even when you played Ohio State, y'all had speed. You know what I mean?
Yeah, Alabama found out.
Yeah, is Alabama found? That's my point. I mean, and but once guys know where they're going and what they're supposed to be doing, you can see it right in front of your eyes. Ohio State has a very dynamic defense, which should get better. Like you said, I thought Tyreek Smith had a hell of a game the other night. That's what they've kind of been missing from that defensive end group. The week before, Zach Harrison had a pretty good game against Indiana. I thought he played pretty well the other night, but they just got to continue to get that rise from their defensive ends because, people have been so used to seeing that dynamic on the field, right?
Yeah, and it goes back to the comment I made earlier. I think that the thing that they have to be able to do by the end of the year is get home with 4 guys so they can play coverage. Because, down the stretch, there are going to be some offenses that can cause some issues. And especially when you have to send, 5 or 6 guys to get home, the coordinators are going to have schemes for that, and the players will be able to take advantage of it. So if they can play a 4-man rush, and whether that's, doing games and twists up front to maybe even free them up, I have no problem with that. Doesn't have to be a straight rush, but 4 guys getting after the quarterback has to be something that they can do.
Yeah, exactly. And they've got a zone scheme going too now, they're dropping guys occasionally, all that kind of stuff. They're mixing it up. I want to get into this. So the reset, this was the big showdown. What do you call it? Statement Saturday. Michigan State made a hell of a statement, right? Down 16 at home to your big brother, end quote. And those were air quotes I put around there for folks who are just listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or whatever. And you come back and win that game. Dude, number one, what does that do for the Dauber of Mel Tucker? As I call them, the Fighting Mel Tuckers in Michigan State. And you can just answer maybe in the same paragraph, what does it do to their big brother team, otherwise known as Michigan and Jim Harbaugh?
Sure. First off, Mel Tucker, I think the world of him. I think he is a great coach. I got to watch him in action up close in preseason camp. And here's the best way to describe him is he's always hoarse because he's yelling constantly. Yeah. He's yelling at players. He's yelling at his assistant coaches. I watched him yell at a guy who was doing the social media video because he put the wrong music with the recruiting video. I watched him get on it. He's like, I said he's like yelling at the guy, and then he starts talking the Big Ten Network crew out there. He starts talking to us again. He said, he's like, I tried to tell him more than once that we need to get some different music on the recruiting videos. He said, he just ain't getting it done. He said, that's not going to be good enough. That's how he operates all the time. It is absolutely amazing. And so I think this is the difference for the Michigan State Spartans and the Michigan Wolverines is Michigan did more than enough to win that football game. 552 total yards. They threw it for 406. Cade McNamara had never played a game like that before. And I said this before the game. I didn't think it was because he couldn't do it. I think it was because they never put him in a position. They did on Saturday, and he balled out. Michigan did more than enough to win that football game. But Mel Tucker's guys are mentally tougher. And Jim Harbaugh, I feel like this has been a thing for his guys, is they fade. They've been bad in the second half of games, and they haven't won the games they're supposed to. Mel Tucker wasn't going to let that happen, and he never strayed from the script. And it was amazing, right? Because they had the 2 4th down plays that they went for, and they didn't just go for them. They were going for the end zone on the 4th downs. They're like, we're not just going to convert this, we're going to score. And they got close both times. And then they went for 2 instead of kicking the extra point in 2 critical situations. And those are the differences in games where Mel's guys are getting beat on defense. Like they are getting beat like they stole something. And Mel's like, screw it, we're going to stay aggressive. And that's how they win games. And they're doing it with lesser talent. And I think that 90, however many yard reception from that kid who's from East Lansing who plays for the Wolverines, he totally outran the whole defense. Like Michigan State, they're suffering from the end of D'Antonio's tenure and the players that he recruited, but they're rising above their level because they have a coach who's taking them there. Yeah. As I look at Michigan, I think Michigan settles to where they are typically because their coach doesn't have that same killer instinct. And that was 100% the difference in the game to me.
Yeah. By the way, I know Mel Tucker extremely well. Used to talk with him as often as I could when he was at Ohio State, with Coach Trussell. And but he and I have kept in touch all the way through his career because I just think he's one of those guys. You just need to give him a chance as a head coach. Remember, the Jaguars had him for a little while. He was the interim head for a little while, and then they went another direction, and they finally ended up with Urban. You know what I mean? It's like right. I'm not sure the rebuild has happened for them yet, but my point is he's a really sharp guy, but he's a real person. He is an in your face, no holds barred, telling you exactly what he thinks at every moment. You know exactly where you stand with him at all times. Even when dealing with him, but where you give him really credit here, Joshua, what people weren't catching on to in the summer, and I kept trying to tell people, nobody made over their team via the transfer portal or JUCO or wherever, or sort of like, I don't know if running guys off is the right term of putting it, but hey, you're not going to be able to play here. It's kind of like more the way of putting it. than that guy did, right? And he had a vision, and that vision has come true. Am I saying they're on the level of Ohio State? I don't think so. Of course, we're going to find out, in 3 weeks. But it's amazing how a guy had this vision, and some people were poo-pooing it, but it is the modern vision of college football. Go out and get some players because they're out there now in the transfer portal. And it's crazy what he's done, right?
Yeah, I mean, he revamped it. And I think in the program right now, there's like 33 or 35 new players between, guys coming out of high school and transfers that he got in. And I think the transfer impact is present, and it's as visible as Kenneth Walker, right? That guy, if they don't have that guy, this is a different season. And I mean, that is exactly what it is. And the most impressive thing about this too is I picked this team, like many other analysts, to finish last in the East. Gave them no shot, no chance. They were 2 years away in my mind, weren't supposed to be this good. And Mel Tucker said, damn all you people in the media who picked us last, I'm going to show you that we're a much better team than anybody anticipated. And now they're putting themselves in a position to be fighting for the college football playoff, probably at worst a New Year's Six game in year 2 of Mel Tucker. Absolutely amazing. Yeah,
absolutely amazing. Hey, real quick, before we get into the Big Ten West, which is, wow. This is going to be an exciting last 4 weeks of the year for Ohio State, right? At Nebraska, hosting Purdue, hosting Michigan State, Purdue. Oh my goodness. That just shows you teams can get better as a year goes on. Speaking of writing a team off. And then of course the game at the Big House, James Franklin, I think, understands now the Big House is at Michigan. Oh my goodness. What a week he had. But the bottom line is this is quite the gauntlet Ohio State's about to run, because you're running into Desperado, otherwise known as Scott Frost, this week at Nebraska. They've been so close to winning so many games this year. Then you got Jeff Brom, and we all know what he did to Ohio State several years ago. And then Michigan State and Michigan, what a run, right?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Looking at Nebraska, they have athletes, they have good players. They literally can't get out of their own way. And me and Jerry DiNardo, who's on the Big Ten Network with me, went back and forth on one of the post games about this team, because he's like a lot of us, where we're very critical of Scott Frost, and we don't think that he has done enough with the team to break through in these games. But I also made the comment that Scott Frost ain't the one turning the football over, and Scott Frost ain't the one committing penalties, and he's not the one making bonehead special teams plays or missing kicks. I said that's on players, and I don't think there's a player in that locker room who's taking control enough to say, all right, guys, we're done doing this. We're done being close enough. We want to be great. And you can go back and forth. I think a lot of that is how much you buy into leadership, whether you're going to be one of those guys. But I'll share this story because I didn't have the time to share it on television. But I learned at the end of 2013, where we lost to Michigan State, and I saw Urban dejected and lost and reeling for questions for the first time in my career, is our 25th game where we ended up finding that out. Right. And then we ended up losing in the Orange Bowl to Clemson. And that was a little bit of a different situation, because it was a bowl game that none of us really wanted to be in. We thought we would be playing for a national championship. And, how much are you going to be totally bought in when you get to spend 5 days in Miami? But we didn't have the guys at that point who wanted to say, okay, the buck stops here. We're going to go out. We're going to win this game. We're going to end the year off right. And Urban, as great of a leader as he was just unbearable at times after losing games. And so we go into the 2014 season, we went on the road in our first game, and then our home opener, we lose. And we see Urban again, dejected and reeling and asking all of the questions. The difference for us that year was we had some players that made decisions, said, F it, like this is it. We're not a team that is, 3 out of 4 games are losses. That is not who we are. That's not who we've been. And so we're not going to be that. Yeah. And I'm not exactly sure they've had a guy in that. I'm not in that building, but I'm not exactly sure Nebraska's had that guy. And all of that to say, until somebody makes that decision, Ohio State could probably play as sloppy as they want to. Nebraska's literally going to say, all right, this is the time where we're going to lose it. We're going to give you guys the win. Not to say that Ohio State should not take them seriously because they can be dangerous. Yes. It is to say that as close as Nebraska might try to play them, I don't have any confidence they can actually win a game like that.
Yeah. But isn't it amazing, though, when you look at how a coach has tied himself to a quarterback? I'm talking about Scott Frost and Adrian Martinez, because Adrian Martinez at times looks really good.
Yeah.
But, wow, it just seems like there's a mistake or four in the course of a game, in the big games where and it's uncanny the way his career has gone. I mean, I keep saying this is their last shot, in my opinion, against a big time opponent to show what both of them are all about. I mean, and I know like you said, the coach doesn't play, but he recruits the players. He's the one who puts the players on the field. This is my best guy at this position, and that guy's been Adrian Martinez for him at quarterback. And we all know what that means to a football team. It is that moment, right?
Yeah. But it's interesting to me, though, because he's probably the best guy that they have to play quarterback. Like, that's a hard decision to make if you're Scott, and obviously you try to out recruit what you have on the roster currently. But like, who's he going to go to? You said it. Like, he gets your hopes up because he makes some phenomenal plays, and then all of a sudden he's going to fumble it, or he's going to throw you 4 interceptions in one game when he only had 3 on the season coming in. Like, it's going to be something like that Martinez is going to do. Scott Frost, though, is an interesting character in this regard. We listened to him for 3 years talk about how he needed time to get his players in, and the cupboard was bare in the set and the third. And then he got the players in, and they got really close. And he's, it's the same old movie. But one of the lines that he says that just really makes me think is, well, our guys are going to be motivated. I don't have to do that. If I got to motivate the guys, I got the wrong ones in here. Buddy, they're paying you $5 million a year. You better be a motivator too. You're not just a coach. You are a cheerleader and a coach for $5 million a year. And I think that might be the difference there, is maybe he believes in the maturity of his locker room a little bit more than he should. Or maybe he believes in this mentality of the Nebraska that he played at, where, the guys get hyped themselves and they only got to get hyped for a couple of games a year because they should be able to win the rest of them. Yeah. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but it's a very unique kind of mentality he has as a head coach.
When he played at Nebraska, there was a standard. You know what I mean? It was an ongoing legacy standard that, and the problem is for Nebraska right now is over the last 20 years or so, that's, they've leaned on the standard of the 90s. You know what I mean? As in, if you follow my drift, they haven't set their own standard. And
the issue in that, and this is the issue in the territory that Michigan's getting into, is none of the cats on that roster right now were alive in the 90s.
Exactly.
There's probably a couple, but most of the guys, they have no recollection of how good Nebraska was. Shoot, I was born in 94, and that was like right in the middle of their heyday. They don't have guys who know about that. Right. Michigan is a similar way. A lot of their players would not be alive, and I would say every player on their roster wasn't coherent as a youngster to have seen them win their last Big Ten championship. Yeah. And they're still relying on the trophies in the lobby to bolster their brand, right? As what they are. And it's both of them right now. They're and something needs to change to where they say, all right, as much history as we have here, I'm pressing the reset button. I'm not talking about those guys until we can say that we're like those guys. We have no reason to talk about any of the great teams that came before here until we're a great team. Yeah.
Champions of the West probably doesn't even make any sense, from their fight song. Probably doesn't even make any sense to any of those players. When the Big Ten was the West Conference, the Western Conference, you know what I mean? That's how far it goes back from Hey, Josh, before we real quick, it is stunning, though, how this series turned in your lifetime, isn't it? I mean, I'm talking about Ohio State, Michigan. It is stunning, isn't it? I mean, you look at it back now, because see, I look at every game, every year, that game is the referendum really on that year. But man, after 2 decades, the referendum is amazing. There is something going on there that, that's really crazy when you think about it.
It is. And it's so funny. I was talking to a very close friend of mine in the media business who is a huge Michigan fan. And he was talking about how Ohio State would never lay an egg against Michigan the way that they kind of did against Penn State. Not to say that Ohio State's performance was bad, but it was sloppy. They never play sloppy against Michigan because it matters that much.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And even as the rivalry has been diluted, maybe nationally to some people, Buckeyes don't give a damn. They don't care.
Yeah.
And that is the mentality that Ohio State has taken to it since I've been around. Obviously, during my days there and thereafter, it has been that it is the most important thing that you can do. You hear the coaching staff talk about it. When any other team would be with the talent and the success that Ohio State's had, any other team would come into the season talking about, we've got our eyes on the CFP. And you don't hear the guys say that. They say, we want to beat Michigan, we want to win a Big Ten championship, and then we want to compete for a national title. But it always starts with, we want to beat the team up north.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. And here's Michigan having lost another rivalry game this past weekend. And now they've got to get, because they're not out of it. You know what I mean? They need some help, but they're not out of it. And whatever. Hey, real quick before we go, Big Ten West, how would you explain it to people?
Crapshoot.
Who have you got your eye on right now? I mean,
Minnesota, and Wisconsin.
We're talking about a possible rematch. Minnesota, Ohio State. Ohio State can run the gauntlet here, right? But Wisconsin.
I said that in week 1 as well. Actually, I said there's a chance that Minnesota would be good enough to win the Big Ten West, and you could see a rematch of week 1 and week 13 in Indy. You know
why? Because all people saw was that running back at Minnesota, and when he went out for the year, but it's not a one-trick pony. PJ Fleck has put together a pretty decent program there. He's recruited very well, especially for Minnesota, and it's showing up big time now, right?
It is, and the defense has steadily improved for Minnesota throughout the season. I think they had some guys across their defensive line and at the linebacker position really emerged as very good players. Their offensive line is a well-oiled machine. I mean, it could potentially be the best in the Big Ten when it's playing their best. I mean, that's how good they are there. Tanner Morgan hasn't returned to 2019 standards, but he has played very good football. He's led that team. He's been efficient when he's had to throw the ball, but unquestionably the run game is something that really works for them because PJ is a time of possession kind of guy. He's old school when it comes to that, having worked with a guy like Tressel in his past. And so he wants to run the play clock all the way down and then snap the ball, run it, and then do the same thing over and over again. And it really works for him.
Yeah.
The other team in the West would be Wisconsin as of right now. And I thought they were dead in the water because they look bad. Like Graham Mertz looked like he couldn't throw a damn football.
Yeah.
And they figured out how to run it. And their defense figured out how to take the football away. And now all of a sudden they put themselves back in that conversation.
Dumb question here, but when you see, was it Jalen Berger, is that the kid's name that all of a sudden they just dismissed, like several weeks ago? Is it possible that there were some things in that locker room that weren't right and now they're right? I mean, you know what I mean? You've been on teams like you just talked about earlier. I mean, about teams that get it and teams that think they get it, but they don't get it. But if you've seen that, I mean, I'm not just saying that, but you've seen a different kind of a Wisconsin, right? The last several weeks.
Yeah, no, I think that they just found their identity. That might have something to do with it in the running back room because they've got this kid, Braylon Allen, who is a freshman who's really good, and Ches Malusi, who's a Clemson transfer, who's also a good player. Yeah. And so now you see those guys really emerging, and maybe they feel like they're confident in that they're the guys in that room and that they don't have any potential drama. And again, don't know what the dismissal was about. But I thought that their offensive line had played really poorly in the beginning of the year. I didn't think it looked like a Wisconsin offensive line. And now all of a sudden they look like the guys that we tend to expect over there in Madison. So, they're playing their brand of ball.
It's crazy. Hey, real quick, before you go, you look around the nation, because I know you keep up with this and stuff too. I thought Kenneth Walker III had a talk about referendums. Coming out of that game against Indiana when he was held to 83 yards on 24 carries, whatever it was, you're kind of going, okay, they finally ran into a defense that could line up right, and gave them, and without a pick six, they don't win that game probably, and you're kind of like, your doubts are a little bit about Michigan State, and all of a sudden they come up and in the toughest of times of moments, this guy in particular delivers with some help from his friends. But, as you look at the Heisman race around the country, because people are interested in that, because of Spencer Rattler falling off the beam, all these guys that were preseason favorite, Uiagalelei from Clemson falling off the beam. But just what's your take on it? And where does Kenneth Walker III and C.J. Stroud, for example, where do they fit in your thinking?
Yeah, not a lot of dominant guys this year, just nationally. And all the name brands that people had talked about, Sam Howell's another name that I would throw into that conversation, have completely they haven't done their part whatsoever. I know people like Bryce Young from Alabama as a guy who should be in that conversation. I don't necessarily disagree. He's a quarterback on one of the best teams. If you want to go that route, then you would look at a Desmond Ridder. The guy's name escapes me, but the Jerome Ford, is it the running back for Cincinnati? In some of the performances that he's been able to stack up, if we're talking about a year where there's not really been a dominant guy, so maybe a Cincinnati guy talks himself into the conversation. I know Georgia's got a couple of guys on defense that people would love to see in New York. And if there's a year for a defensive player, I don't see why it wouldn't be this one. But as I look at it, and these are the guys I cover, obviously, it's hard to argue against Kenneth Walker and some of the outstanding performances that he had. I think the one against Michigan is a Heisman statement performance simply because your team is down and you're a big reason why they come back. Nobody had ever scored 5 rushing touchdowns on the Wolverines. He was able to do that for almost 200 yards on a rush defense that people thought was one of the best in the conference. He said, we'll see about that. And then CJ, like you had mentioned, I don't know why his name isn't more prominent in this discussion. You give me reasons why. Like outside of the Tulsa game, where that's a team that consistently drops 8, so they cloud your windows. The dude's been good. Even against Oregon in a loss, he was really good. Against his Minnesota in his first start in a night game on Thursday night in the rain, second half of that game, he was phenomenal. And then a clunker against Penn State where people were like, oh, man, it's not very explosive and our guys aren't getting open down the field. 300 yards. Come on. I mean, what are we talking about? I'm with you. And it's funny how you see guys come on and come off. I mean, that's why, the whole talk about the Heisman in September is so stupid. You know what I mean? I mean, you look up and you're trying to build a TV show, Tim. And that's one of the talking points. I mean, if we're building TV shows in September, we got to talk about something. Well, that's the problem with college football at the beginning of the year is everybody remembers last year. Everybody is hanging things on last year. Clemson can't be beat. Or Texas. They're thinking about Texas from like 2004.
Exactly.
Instead of Texas from today, because they're always going in the top 25.
Speaking of living on your past legacy, like we were talking about with Nebraska.
Jeez, Pete. So I want to take a moment for this one, man, because that program gets more benefit of the doubt than any freaking program in the history of college football, just in terms of we're going to say that they're a top 25 team when they ain't. What in the last handful of years has given us proof of that? And then all of a sudden, you're supposed to get rid of Tom Herman and things are supposed to turn around. And I tweeted something today that I got to read because it crystallizes exactly what I'm talking about when I say year after year, Texas ain't back. And then take my Twitter a little second to load here, of course. All right. 8 games into Steve Sarkisian's tenure at Texas. He has lost by a bigger margin than Tom Herman ever did, blown a bigger lead than Tom Herman ever did, lost more games in a row than Tom Herman ever did. That program is not back, nor do I think they will be back anytime soon.
Wow. But they're going to the SEC, man. That's going to heal all wounds.
Yeah, you know what? I don't know what they were thinking. And it's really interesting as a program who is big money, and they have, even with some of the struggles that they've had, they have been the face of the Big 12, and wanted their own TV network and everything, would make a decision to be the 5th most prominent program in the conference that they're going to go into.
Yeah. If that, maybe I'm talking, but let me see.
We can have the conversation. I mean,
dude, I'm telling you, I grew up in Texas. My last 11 years of my first 11 years were Alabama, second 11 were Texas before I moved up here to the great state of Ohio. But the bottom line is, I always told people, even when they started the Longhorn Network, I go, well, I'm going to be interested to see how that thing goes, because when I was growing up in Texas, you were either a Texas alum and you loved Texas X's, excuse me. That's what they call them, Texas X's. You either loved Texas or you hated Texas. There was very little gray area in there where which is where you have to find your viewers to push y'all's Nielsen ratings over the edge. The Big Ten Network has a huge audience right now because there are alumni of all the Big Ten teams everywhere. But if it was just the Northwestern Network, what would you have? I guess what I'm saying is, Texas is one of those programs where a lot of people in Texas dance when they have problems. You follow my drift? It's not like Ohio State. I remember my kid went to Ohio University and Ohio U was playing Ohio State one year, and when he's down there, and Ohio U actually had the lead like in the third quarter, and they're all excited. They're all fired up there on Court Street in some bar. And then all of a sudden they got all morose, like, well, wait a minute though. What if Ohio State gets beat? Because in their hearts, they were Ohio State fans because that was the pride of the state, and Ohio State came back and won that game, and they were all happy and we gave it a good shot, but go Ohio State, but that's kind of, Texas doesn't have that. I mean, I'm telling you, they don't. And I think they come home to roost. But like you just said, real quick, Texas and Oklahoma leave in 2 years. I'll tell you the guy that I'm interested to see if UC hangs on to Luke Fickell. He understands. I think they understand that's a conference that they're moving into, the Big 12, where they could be a big player right off the bat. And it's kind of the opposite of what Texas is going to be doing. Yeah.
I mean, that's 100%. I mean, you can make the argument today that Cincinnati would be the best team in that conference, like right now. Right. Yeah. So it's gettable. Obviously, there will be some more dollars that would come with being in that conference. And what is he making, like 2.3 a year, something like that right now? Yeah. And so, I know Luke isn't necessarily motivated by money. I think he'd want to be compensated fairly, but I don't think he's out here to just chase checks. What would be interesting is kind of the conversation that's going on in Big Ten country. He already turned down Michigan State, and I think that was a lot to do with some of the issues that they were facing just from a culture standpoint. So I don't know if that's necessarily a destination that he would be very interested in if Mel Tucker did decide that he wanted to go south to LSU, for example. But James Franklin to USC, I think, is still in play even after this little 3-game losing streak. And I think that he is very, it's like, I'm in this for the kids. And then once the kids graduate from high school, like we can go our separate ways type situation, him and Penn State. Yeah. Is Penn State a destination for a guy like Luke Fickell? Yeah. Yeah. Like I truly think that he could be successful there. He'd be able to recruit the same places he currently recruits. I think he'd be able to lock down the state of Pennsylvania. I think he can go into the DMV and get guys. I think he could put a fence around New Jersey for Penn State. Like that becomes an interesting thing. And now you're in a conference that is always going to have a path to the CFP, right? And Penn State recently has been the challenger to Ohio State. Yes. And he, frankly, could be somebody that could put that situation over the top. Yeah. And as I explain it, there aren't that many blue bloods in college football. Penn State's a blue blood, meaning, Nebraska, it used to be a blue blood. I think Nebraska, I'm not sure Nebraska, as far out as it is out there, the outpost and stuff, where when they went into, the East Coast and stuff and got players, and even Texas and places like that. I mean, there are so many other places you can go now and play between there, but Nebraska is a bad job. I talked to Jerry DiNardo about this. It was super interesting. And he thinks it's a better job than what I perceive it to be. Because he thinks that you would have resources and they would pay somebody, $7 or $8 million if they felt like that guy could win. Right. Yeah. But I told him the biggest reason that somebody would say they don't want to take that job is it is difficult to recruit. Yeah. And unless you're a developmental coach, you don't want to be there. And this is a conundrum when you get into that. Recruiting and development is the key, because when you can develop guys that you've recruited that are high ranking guys, it puts you over the top. If you are somebody who is going to struggle to recruit there and you're not a developmental coach, you put a cap on what you can do. If you are a developmental coach, you are conceding that you're probably not getting big time recruits. and developmental teams, the Iowas and the Wisconsins of the world never win the national title.
Yeah.
Right. So what do?
Yeah.
Because they're somewhere in between there.
They settle, I mean, that's what happens. You're exact. That's the best way of putting it I've heard so far, is like, that's exactly their conundrum. It's like, what do we want to be? Are we going to continue to throw this standard? But this, Josh, before we go, you made the tour this year of all the Big Ten facilities, et cetera, all the schools. They're spending a lot of money. These schools are spending a lot of money on football. The Power 5 teams, most of them, I'm not sure Vanderbilt is, but most of them, and they expect things, right? I mean,
right.
Whether it's realistic or not, it's expected, right?
Yeah, it is. And, I think that's part of James Franklin's deal at Penn State is, he wants more. He wants more in terms of facilities. It's really interesting going through all the facilities. I would say that Ohio State has a bottom 3 or 4 facility in the Big Ten Conference. Wow. And it's probably not as high on the priority list because they can still out recruit everybody and they can compete because they've got really good coaches who have proven that they can put guys in the NFL. Recruits probably overlook it a little bit coming to a place like Ohio State, but when you're Illinois and when you're Maryland and some of these other programs, when you're Northwestern, like you need to have the state of the art, top of the top in order to even be in the conversation. And so that's a part of it. Like Nebraska spending the money right now, the facility is.
Yeah.
But they've committed the funds to doing something bigger and better, which is what they need to do if they want to still stay in that conversation.
Wow. Well, the rumor is, as you well know, Ohio State's, maybe headed toward doing something about what you just talked about, I
think it's at this point, something I would love to see.
Yeah. It's hard to believe though. I mean, I was there when they broke ground on the Woody Hayes Athletic Center in 1986 and Woody Hayes was there and I go, and he was touting it and he goes, and I go, well, and I walked up to him afterwards. I said, well, aren't you the guy that said, if you're going to play in the North Atlantic, you got to train in the North Atlantic, and or going to fight in the North Atlantic, got to train in the North Atlantic. He goes, that's old school. He goes, that's what you got to keep up. You've got to be a leader. You've got to be a leader in this. You know what I mean? So I even caught Woody in a little bit of a conundrum there about ethic and also about keeping up with the Joneses or maybe trying to be the Joneses. Right. I mean, it's just amazing that the Woody Hayes Athletic Center would be considered one of the bottom 3 or 4 in the league, man. I'm just,
and it's not to say it's a bad nice facility.
Yeah.
But the way that people are doing things right now, the facilities are all glitz and glam and there's glass everywhere. And, they're putting Maryland has a freaking recording studio in the locker room or in the players lounge or whatever. Nobody uses it, but it's cool to say that you have one just in the off chance you get a guy who likes to make a little bit of music. And it's not to say that Ohio State needs that. But one thing I did notice is that in every one of these facilities, the coach has an office and then they have a meeting room and they're separate areas. Gotcha. And at Ohio State, the coach's office is also the players' meeting room. And it's just things like that where maybe a bigger footprint does a little bit more because they got the nice players lounge and they've redone the cafeteria in there. And the weight room isn't the biggest, but it's definitely functional. I think the training room is fine. The locker room is good. Maybe a bigger footprint so they can expand some of the areas changes the way you think about it. But again, when you're Ohio State, you could be a little bit late to that party and you can be Ryan Day and you could just say, oh yeah, year 2, we competed for a national championship. Oh yeah, we're winning the Big Ten. Where's the trophy case? Where's all the rings at? We got guys who are 1st-round draft picks. You don't need a facility to do all that. We can go into the parking lot and we can have that conversation. Yeah,
you could have a PowerPoint presentation that would take care of that.
That's it.
Anyway, hey, Joshua Perry, man, you're one of my favorites. Well, I say that about everybody that comes on here, but y'all are
telling lies.
Y'all are my favorites, but
you can only have a couple of favorites.
Yeah, but we were sitting there at Roosters, way back one of those parties Dom DePerry put together. I just love having conversations with you, man, and always have. But I appreciate
we had a good one in the parking lot of the Horseshoe after we were taping something in there. It was a cold night, but we were just going back and forth, and we always appreciated you. I love the press conference, ask a question, and then the follow-up or two. Yeah. It's a classic maneuver. from you, Tim, and it's always fun listening to your podcast and watching all the stuff that you're doing in quote unquote retirement.
Well, I watch every show you're on the Big Ten Network, man. I think, you're just now at the takeoff. You're like SpaceX. You're just now at the takeoff tower of your career. But you do an excellent job, and you know that. And I mean, this is where we both pat each other on the back. But mine is sincere.
I'm being sincere too. I definitely appreciate it. It, man. Covering sports is one of the best jobs that you can have.
Yes.
Somebody pays you to talk about something you would probably talk about for free.
Oh man, I'm sitting out there in that tailgate show before the game the other day, and I just love we had Jake Ballard and Anthony Rothman sitting there from 97.1 The Fan. I just love to talk about the game, and people always want to know how a game's going to end before it ever starts, and you kind of go, hey, you got to let this play out because Penn State and Ohio State have had some of the best games over the last 8-9 years that you never see. Ohio State, now is 8-1 in those games, but they've been great games just like the other night. That was a fun game to watch if you didn't have a rooting interest. Agreed?
I agree. And it's interesting. I ought to give you a little bit more credit for the trajectory of my career because we started off over there on campus, hopping on old radio before games and stuff.
Yeah.
So,
all
good.
Hey, Joshua, thanks for joining the Tim May podcast.
Hey, appreciate you.
Oh, always appreciate Joshua Perry joining me. I always have great conversations with him. And that was one also. You agree, don't you there, Awesome?
100%.
Hey, Awesome. It's a strange world we live in. Everybody wrote Wisconsin off for dead 5 or 6 weeks ago. They're in the race. Let's put it that way in the Big Ten West. Minnesota, has proven after recovering from losing its number one running back, maybe the best running back in the country. We'll ask Spencer Holbrook what he thinks about that assessment. That's a wink and a nudge and an inside joke. But bottom line is they found a way to stay relevant and stay in there. And basically, so the PJ Fleck era has been built on more than flash, clearly. Before we get back to Ohio State and the Big Ten East, the Big Ten West is quite interesting, isn't it?
It is. I said last week that I thought Minnesota was now the favorite on that half of the bracket, and I feel even more strongly about that now. I still think there is something missing offensively for Wisconsin. It starts at quarterback, and if you're going to try and spin it forward and project who could give Ohio State a game if they handle their business in the next 4 weeks on this side of that bracket, we've been through this song and dance with Wisconsin before, and I don't think if you're going to go in the dome and you can't throw the football or try and find more consistent success than Wisconsin has had through the air, I don't think you have any shot at all against Ohio State. So, Minnesota, maybe that week 1 game meant more to Ohio State than it seemed at the time with that many veteran players. And as you said, PJ Fleck, putting some substance in there along with the sizzle. We know they put a lot of steak on the field when they had those jumbo packages and created some problems. And that was a competitive game and a fun game. Ohio State wound up winning pretty easily. But if it hadn't been for the mystifying Bowling Green loss, which I now wish that I had got to see exactly how that happened to talk about it a little bit more. You're talking about a team whose only loss is to Ohio State, who's in position to win the West. And that could have been a top 10, top 15, who knows how high showdown that meant more in Indianapolis. But as you alluded to, now it just looks like a mess where there's not really, a marquee opportunity there to come out on that side of the Big Ten. But, that last game of the season looks like that'll be the West Division Championship. It's in Minneapolis. I still think that at this point, the Gophers are the team that will emerge there.
Yeah, I do too. I'm impressed, and like Joshua and I talked about, the thing about Minnesota, they're playing trestle ball to a certain extent. Taking all the seconds off of the play clock they can, trying to get to the fourth quarter with a chance to win, put themselves in a position to win, and then they're winning those games, and that's what stands out about it. They found another way to do it after losing their best player, their most spectacular player. And I'm really interested to see if they can finish down the stretch. These next 4 weeks are going to be challenging for anybody in the Big Ten, definitely for Ohio State. And but yes, Minnesota, I think, is a team to watch there. But Wisconsin, you got to give it up to Wisconsin for finding a way and to be relevant, because it sure didn't look like they were going to be relevant 3 or 4 weeks into the year. And here they are sitting there in a pretty good race, right?
Yeah. And I mean, Paul Chryst is a proven commodity. So it's not surprising that he would find some ways to get guys to buy in and improve as the season goes on. And, Wisconsin can be fit in that same bucket that in some ways, the way we've talked about a lot of teams, whether that's Ohio State or Clemson or whoever. COVID changed a lot of things, and Wisconsin is a heavy development program. So, they don't build around 4 and 5 star guys. So You take away all that time in their strength program or in a spring practice or a training camp or playing game, any of that stuff, it's significant. So maybe it shouldn't come as a surprise that Wisconsin would get stronger and better as the season would go on, because they've got a coach and a track record of doing it at a high level. So, they've been on that every other year kind of schedule to go play Ohio State and Indianapolis. So they have the opportunity now to do that.
Yeah. That's funny. Yeah. And we saw with the COVID, can we call it the era now, or is it over even yet? But
I don't know if it's over yet.
Yeah. We saw what the pandemic did to Ohio State and even its development, especially on the defensive side of the ball, especially about knowing who you got and why you got them and what they're going to do. And, you and I were talking about, and especially you after the game the other night, let's just get into Ohio State a little bit, headed toward Nebraska. What was troubling to you is they're still throwing these packages out there occasionally defensively. Well, not occasionally, still pretty good bit. And, what's wrong with finding your 11, 13, 15 best guys and letting them play ball, despite the situations? You saw it backfire on Ohio State a couple of times, even the other night with 13 men on the field or whatever. As long as it's more than 11, it doesn't really matter. But they got caught in the flip flop. It wasn't that they had 13 line up, but they got caught in the flip flop. But we've still seen this defense take dramatic strides. And like you and Zach Boren talk about on the Buck IQ this week, which is one of my favorite things I see on the internet every week. The 3 turnovers were no joke. The 3 turnovers were huge in that game, even though they didn't get a pick 6 like I predicted. And they definitely did get a pick 6 from Still Chambers, because he got kicked out of the game. He got a kick 6. But the bottom line is, though, they still made plays that were huge in that game, not the least of which was Jerron Cage's breathless scoop and score. I think he's still in the oxygen tent as we speak. But there's no doubt the defense has made big strides. Do you agree?
Yeah, I do. And, my only, quibble with it is what you talked about, the uncertainty of who's going to be out there on given snaps and the rotation of the personnel and the mass subs in situations that don't allow for it. And Penn State's not substituting. So I don't know how Ohio State's trying to match personnel when the personnel is unchanged. That doesn't make sense to me. I'm not ever going to sit here and really just say, this is what I think the depth chart should be. I don't get to watch practice every day. They make decisions in the Woody for reasons that are far more informed than mine. I do know when I watch Steel Chambers that Ohio State's defense is noticeably different. And so I wonder what goes into some of the decisions that they've made at linebacker. I know what I've seen from Tyleik Williams when he's been on the field at defensive tackle, wreaking havoc. And that's not a knock on Ty Hamilton or Antoine Jackson or any Jerron Cage who's scooping up to score. And just sometimes I don't understand fully the picture there. And I get that part. I'm not paid to draw up the depth chart or make those decisions. And I know that Ohio State's not just throwing darts at a board. It's this guy's turn. They're doing that for a reason, but it does seem to be operating in a much more seamless fashion. And I think it would have looked even more impressive if anyone wearing a black and white shirt on Saturday knew what holding was on the offense, because those were some of the most egregious examples I've ever seen. I think there may be a tendency to look at the passing yards that Ohio State gave up, now this problem's coming up. I don't think that was it. No. I think if Tommy Eichenberg is not tackled to the ground, then you don't get a 25-yard completion.
Yeah.
If Lathan Ransom isn't just grabbed around the neck and wrangled to the turf on a blitz, you don't get the football out of your hand. Ohio State gave up 33 rushing yards. And I think if the holding situations had been, if that had been addressed earlier on in the game and it had stopped, I think all those numbers would have looked very different. But those two things that I mentioned there, Lathan Ransom, if he's coming on a blitz, Eichenberg coming on a blitz, that wasn't like, I barely remember Ohio State doing anything aggressive schematically in terms of pressure against Oregon. And that would have looked like a completely different, concept and defense than what they did in week 2. And they deserve credit for looking at that and improving as the year went on.
This is something I don't know the mechanics of, so I'm just throwing it out there from the standpoint of discussion. But do officiating crews get a scolding? Do they ever get a scolding? Do they, how? I don't know the answer to that. I know that somewhere somebody's got to be going, why didn't you, as we know, these crews basically review the games together and watch a video sometimes right after the game. I know they used to do that at the Woody A Center. They would reserve a place for them to watch a replay and see what they did right and wrong, after the game. I'm not sure whether they do that anymore or when they do it, but oh my goodness. I kind of let games go, like the Steel Chambers thing. I still think, as we well know, they've got to address again targeting, and whether targeting, even if it happened, even if it looks like it happened, was there harm done? You know what I mean? But still kind of dropped his head. You could see it on slow motion, kind of dropped his head before he made the contact. So by the letter of the law this week, as it's being interpreted by Big Ten officials, he was gone for the game, which was huge in that game. I know you agree with me on that because you just talked about Steel Chambers. But holding, when people sitting way up there who paid good money, just ask them to sit up there and DDAC and CDAC can see a jersey being pulled and no call on a guy who is hell-bent to get to the quarterback. And you just wonder, is there a scolding involved the next day by Big Ten officials, by Corolla? Who, what do you think? What do you think happens there?
Well, it's one of the biggest problems with college football officiating nationwide is that you very rarely get any of the public accountability. And we know that there is some, like they're graded, the directors of officiating from the various leagues will look at them, and then the league is assigning which crews work which games. And you would have thought that something as meaningful and significant as Ohio State, Penn State would get one of the elite crews. If that's the best that the Big Ten has, or the second best, depending on, whatever you think about the officiating in Michigan State, which was also pretty bad.
Yeah.
For both teams that were involved in that.
Yeah.
I understand that they have a hard job and that they're not going to get everything right. To call 0 offensive holding penalties on Penn State in that game defies belief. And so, they may get less plum assignments. It's almost impossible to mess up severely enough in the eyes of the powers that be for them to get suspended for a week. But a lot of times you see that and you don't know. They're not putting out releases. They're not saying, well, they missed these calls. Very rarely are you going to see an apology. If it changed an outcome, sometimes you'll get that. Seen that in other leagues in years past. But I think that that's one of the biggest problems, Tim, is that, nobody really knows what their grades are. And maybe there's not that many people that would care about it, but when things are clearly wrong and there's seemingly no accountability for it, then you just wonder, well, how are they ever going to fix these problems?
Yeah.
Because it's not new that Big Ten officiating is bad. We've seen this before. And the same thing happened with the holding calls at Penn State in the Ohio State-Penn State game a year ago. And it happens in most games that Ohio State plays because their pass rushers are so freaking good, you don't have any other chance. That's why I joke that it must be legal to hold Ohio State.
Yeah.
It's the only way to make some of these games even up front. But that's the part that you're saying that I like. There has to be something so that we know, all right, these guys messed up. Like the NBA does that with the 2-minute report. What's the harm in it? What's the harm? They get it wrong. Everyone makes mistakes, but at least let's say what they are.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you're exactly right. And when you've got really three people watching holding on a play, two of them behind the line of scrimmage, and there's no flag on any of those, what are you watching? Is the number one question that and then number two, why aren't you watching this? I mean, right in the middle of the play, there's a blatant hold. There's a guy being taken down, like you said, like it was a rodeo and it was calf roping or what do they call it? Steer wrestling. I mean, right in front of you. Then you think back to the Thayer Munford, and I don't even remember the crew, whether that was a Pac-12 crew or not, that did the Ohio State Oregon game. But Thayer Munford did not hold behind a play, a scramble by C.J. Stroud, which would have kept a drive going that was huge in that game, as you remember. And like Thayer Munford explained it well, I kind of put myself in a position to where it sort of looked like that. I'm paraphrasing what he said, but that's not what you're supposed to call. You're not supposed to call something that looks like this. You're supposed to call whether or not he's got a hold of somebody and keeping them from getting to the play. See, that's what's mind-numbing for people when they look back on games, because I'm telling you, a 10-yard penalty is huge in any kind of setting, especially in a tight ball game. And this idea you just got to roll with the punches or roll with the punches that are allowed to be thrown that shouldn't be thrown. That's not the way you have a boxing match. Even the rules of marquee rules of boxing or whatever it's called. Anyway, I digress. I just thought I'd bring it up because I knew you had an opinion on it. I definitely have an opinion on it. Something has to be done. But then the flip side of it is you can call holding on every play, as you well know. Somebody's grabbing somebody's shoulder pad or something, and you don't want to go that way either, right?
Yeah, and look, I mean, I don't blame Penn State for doing it, because if they're not going to call any holding, then there's no downside to that strategy.
Yeah.
I think it's a lot like anything that, when that comes up, that you can call holding on basically every play in a college football or any football game, really. I think the point is that if you take control of that early on and you get a message that we're not going to be able to get away with this, then a lot of it stops. The egregious holdings are what get called.
Yeah.
That you said that stop somebody from making a play.
Yeah.
Like you got a guard and a defensive tackle mixed up, and the play goes the other way, and they may have just got a handful of jersey. Like, all right, it didn't affect anything. You don't have to throw a flag on that. But we saw so many egregious examples of that were clearly negating a sack or a chance to deflect a football, or who knows what could have happened. That stuff, all you have to do is call that once or twice early on, and then it's clear what the standard is going to be moving forward. But that one got so out of hand. Yeah. Then you're just, you're probably in a situation where you're as an official, like, well, I don't know, that one wasn't as worse as the other one that we didn't call. So I think we're just going to have to let that one go.
Yeah.
Come by that.
But think about it real quick before we move on. That could have been one of the great games in defensive front four history, or Ohio State defensive front four history, or at least in recent history, and definitely front seven, the way they finally turned to the blitz, because they had to turn to the blitz because they were letting Penn State hold in certain moments, and they turned to the blitz and were fairly effective on occasion. They gave up a few plays that they wished they had back, but when you got to kind of come out of your own character defensively because guys aren't able to get home, yeah, it does affect games. It really does. Golly, I don't know why I just hate it when you can see it so blatantly and nothing happens. Like you said, a guy that's about to make a play, maybe the play of his career, and he's held back. It's too bad. I was going to think of some funny analogy there, but I'm not in a funny mood. Now I'll get in a funny mood. Travion Henderson, welcome to the big time. Welcome to the NIL, as I call the college football now. But wow, 25, 26 carries, 100-something yards. Most of his yards came on about 5 carries. That was definitely running into brick walls a lot of times for him. The offensive line, as you and I talked about, that was not their finest hour by any stretch for Ohio State. But Travion Henderson proved himself worthy of being a collegian. I think he probably already had, but this was a time when they turned to him. And for the most part, he answered the bell, with a few exceptions when he was sitting there with an ice pack on his left knee. We'll see where that goes down the stretch here. But he grew up in that game, didn't he?
Yeah. And, the next part of that is figuring out how severe, that knee or leg or whatever, issue he's dealing with. We saw him limp out of the media room on Saturday night, and he'll probably be feeling that for a couple of days. And I asked him about that. I guess it was last Wednesday night, just, wanting carries, wanting a full workload, getting used to that wear and tear on the body, because it's very different for him. It's well known and documented at this point. He didn't play a senior year of high school. He probably never faced a defense that could do to him what Penn State did to make him earn his yards. And that's not, he's played some fine competition there in Virginia, but, nothing like this in top ranked or top, whatever they were, number 2, maybe in the country in rush defense, Penn State coming in, and they were bound and determined not to let him win that game, but he found a way. That dash around the corner was a 68. He found another gear, and I didn't think, first of all, that he could get the angle to get to the sideline the way he did, and then to be able to cut it up and head downfield. That was just a special looking play to get that opportunity to dash downfield. He made that happen. Now the blocking up front gets him in position. They got him 5 or 6 yards, and he really got the rest with with the way he could pull away. You saw the other one that broke late, where he did not have the speed that he normally does to accelerate away, and he started looking for the stiff arm early because you could tell that he was, not himself. And I think for Ohio State to potentially go down the road and win a national championship, he's going to have to be at a high level and can't be limited by that, whatever it is. I don't know how long it'll last, but I know that'll be a conversation and talking point for us for the next couple days with practice report and availability report on Saturday and all that stuff. Like, that's a big deal because he has, as you said, proven to be a key cog in this Ohio State offense, and they are going to need him. Maybe not that much on Saturday, which could be helpful for Ohio State. Maybe not against Purdue. I don't know, but going to go toe-to-toe with another Heisman Trophy candidate, even though they're not going to be on the field at the same time. Ohio State's going to need and want him available for that Michigan State game for sure.
And of course, ladies and gentlemen, he's referring to Kenneth Walker III, who had a game of games. It's been a long time since a running back at Michigan State had that kind of game, that impactful a performance, and right when it was needed. And of course, it came against their bigger brother, Michigan, at exactly the right time.
Are they going to just change the birth order for these two, or? Yeah,
I'm not sure they're not. I'm not sure they weren't twins, but sometimes your little brother grows up and beats the snot out of you, And I remember watching my younger brother Mike beat the snot out of my older brother Ben quite a few times, and it happens, man. Beware of the path you pave. Somebody else may come down that road going 400 miles an hour and knock you over. But I digress. Bottom line is, real quick, awesome. Before we finish here, C.J. Stroud, stood tall. I mean, the other night made some plays. Didn't maybe make some plays he could have, et cetera. And as I opined in the middle of that game, man, and Joshua Perry and I talked about it too just a little while ago, a run or 2 or 3 by him could really change a lot of things. No, do you line up and just force a guy to run who doesn't, probably that's not his best, it's not his cup of tea? No, you don't. But man, you can just see how it would change the dynamic in a game like the other night. And I keep thinking back to that 2019 game when Justin Fields changed everything by running. I think he had more carries that night than Ohio State. Maybe I'm trying to think, J.K. Dobbins, how many carries he had in that game. But it does change things. But I think that's the one thing you want to see maybe change dynamically about this offense headed forward, because it would really be complete. I just want to know what your thought is on that.
I'm kind of two minds on that, and it's not meant as a cop-out in any way.
I don't mean run 50 times now. Go ahead.
Yeah, 100%. I think of, Dwayne Haskins in this. I find these two to be very similar.
Yeah.
C.J. Stroud and Dwayne Haskins. And Dwayne, not only did he want to throw first, but they were certainly, not wanting him to run at all early on. We talked about that even with Justin Fields, his first year here, even though he could do it, they didn't really want to risk it with the injury. I don't think they have to completely be in that same boat with Kyle McCord behind C.J. Stroud. But, that game down in Dallas against TCU, like Dwayne just had to keep it once because TCU was selling out to stop it, and he got a free stroll, didn't even really have to run. He could have walked backwards into the end zone and scored. The same can be true for C.J. Stroud. So I think in limited doses, and sometimes all it takes is the fact that Dwayne did it once so that other teams have to be more cognizant of it moving forward. Once or twice with C.J. Stroud potentially just talking about in the red zone even. Limit it to that package. That changes the dynamic and it evens the numbers in the box. Urban Meyer used to talk about that all the time because he was much more in love with quarterback power and quarterback counter. Right? That's not
he still is, it looks like.
It is. Yeah, you're right. Obviously, that's not going to be part of the arsenal here for C.J. Stroud and Ryan Day. But
let me interrupt you though, because we're sitting there right next to each other, pretty close to each other in the press box, and there was one of those red zone moments where a naked boot by C.J. Stroud, he would have walked in. Instead he hands off to Travion Henderson. I think it was right into the teeth of that Penn State defense, which you just so eloquently put it a while ago, was just fired up to like Travion Henderson. You're not going to beat us, even though he did help beat them. But you know what I mean? Just one play changes everything. Go ahead.
Yeah, and so the other part of that, so the second of the two mind thinking there is that I understand why if you have Travion Henderson, if you have arguably and most had looked as to be the nation's best offensive line, if you've got capable tight ends, and Cade Stover and Jeremy Ruckert, or a fullback, quote unquote, and Mitch Rossi, that you may feel like there's no need to even add that part in, and that you would rather, if you are committed to winning on the ground, doing it in a more traditional fashion with your running back, with your offensive line. And I get all that. I think that's why I say I agree with you that once or twice you show that wrinkle, that it's part of it. You're probably going to score the first time you use it, and then you may not have to go back to it again. I just don't think it'll be a key part of Ohio State's playbook, but it's got to be something that they keep in their hip pocket. Maybe they are just keeping it in their hip pocket to wait for Michigan State or a trip to Ann Arbor down the road. They've never been in a situation that's truly desperate and said, whatever it takes, CJ, go do it.
Yeah.
And as you said all along, it still never really felt like Ohio State was going to lose to Penn State on Saturday night. And it wasn't empty the chamber and do whatever you have to do. Maybe when it gets down to that time in 2 weeks or so, maybe that's what we'll see. I do agree. At some point, he's probably going to have to punch in a touchdown with his feet.
All I know is you just talked about Dwayne Haskins Jr. That game at Maryland, man, it was put up or shut up, and they needed him to run, and he did run. That was a difference in that game, really. Late. It helped make a difference in that game. And what was the final score in that game? 52-51. Why did they score? Why did they score 52? Because they needed to score 52. But the bottom line is that was something that definitely caught Maryland off guard. And Ohio State ends up in the. Did they end up in the playoffs that year? I think no, 2018. Yeah. But you know where I'm going. I'm all these years kind of run together for me anymore, man. But we will see it. I just thought the other night that was a play that could have just popped that game wide open, just like that pass to Olave, where they were not on the same playbook, not on the same page in the chapter of that playbook, and it was just those things happen. As old Woody Hayes borrowed the line from Darrell Royal. 3 things happen when you throw the ball. 2 of them are bad. Well, that was an example of that. But we'll see where they go. Hey, one last thought on this trip to Nebraska. 11 a.m. start out there. I'm not sure that's going to affect this Ohio State football team like a lot of people think. If that really made a difference, and Oregon would have gotten blown out in Ohio Stadium way back when. Remember that way back when earlier in the year? But it
does feel like a very long time ago.
Yeah. You know what? Seriously, it really truly does. Of course, college football playoff rankings this week, they come out after we're recording this, but we'll see if in fact the committee is thinking the same way. That was a long time ago. Yeah. But do you expect any what's the biggest challenge you think taking a team on the road and playing at 11 a.m., which will be 11 a.m. local time in Lincoln?
I think it's not necessarily when they kick off. It's that you have to guard against the physical hangover. Like the Penn State, that is a talented team.
Yep.
They took some shots. We talked about Travion Henderson, obviously. They had to earn it defensively, and those guys threw their bodies around a lot, and that will take a toll. So the fact that you have that relatively quick or quicker turnaround, you go on the road, you play early, as you said, Scott Frost trying desperately to save his job and cling to have something to point to on his resume.
Yeah.
I think all the trap game signs are just clear enough that Ohio State will know, well, hey, you have to get to sleep early. You have to maybe alter some of the stuff you do during the week so that your body is ready at an earlier time. Make sure that you're getting all the treatment that you need, because there's not going to be an excuse. Like you are better than Nebraska in every way, 1 through 85, but they're also Big Ten athletes on that team who lift weights and have scholarships and do have coaches with some Big Ten experience now. So they're not just going to cruise right through it. So
right.
I think they're in a position where, like, sometimes the trap games are clear in hindsight. The Purdue, the Iowa, like, it kind of made sense and they weren't ready. Like this one, like Ohio State should see clearly, like these are the challenges that are there. They should be able to attack them. It doesn't guarantee that they will. I think they will, but it's laid out for them that they know, here's what you have to do. Here's what you have to be aware of. Don't let 11 a.m. beat you.
Yeah.
Like that's, if you're going to lose the game, don't let it be because you weren't ready to play at 11 a.m.
Good point. And, I'm sure that point will be made about 10,000 times in the Woody Hayes Athletic Center this week. You agree, right? Hey,
I do agree. Yes.
Hey, like I said, we're recording this before the college football playoff rankings come out. So let's be, as I like to say, soothsayers. What do you think that when people are listening to this on Tuesday night or Wednesday after the rankings come out on Tuesday night, what do you think the top four will be? Maybe not necessarily in order, but give me the top four.
I honestly don't know the right way to answer this, Tim, because you
don't care because there's 4 weeks left, 5 weeks left. It's
not even that. I mean, I have written that pretty much every single year that the first Tuesday night selection shows existed. What does it mean? It doesn't mean anything because Ohio State is in control of their future here.
It means rankings. It means rankings for ESPN, but go ahead.
Well, of course, and it means rankings and ratings both. And I understand that point of it. The problem that I have is that the logic that they will use on Tuesday night this week will be different than the logic they use on the following Tuesday night. And I think it's unfair to everyone involved, mainly the fans of college football, people who are involved in trying to get there. If it changes and these discussion points are all dependent on 12 people who don't stick with a consistent approach, like we know, I think what's going to happen, I know your question was who are the top four, but I don't know what logic they will use to determine that tonight. So Georgia's going to be number one. I know that. I'm pretty sure that they'll put Cincinnati in the top four. I think because Oklahoma has a 0 in the loss column, they will be there. And, I don't know what they will do. I'm going to guess that they're going to give Alabama a mulligan, and then they'll cite the eye test for that. Although Ohio State, I think, has aced the eye test better than anybody else, save for Georgia. Everyone wants to see Ohio State's offense and Georgia's defense, but Michigan State has a 0.
Yep.
Shouldn't they be in a better position if they are leading or co-leading the Big Ten race?
Michigan State has a better quality win, clearly, than Alabama also. And Alabama has a loss. Yeah.
So I say that, like, that's going to be what they're going to choose from. But you're going to get into situations like, Ohio State is going to be compared always. It seems to always revolve around this team, and the arguments are shifting and changing, even all the way up until December. But in the end, we know that Ohio State's resume is going to be better than Oregon's. So, and they're going to have a better eye test. They're going to have more top 25 wins. They're potentially both going to have a conference championship. And obviously they played each other. But you're only supposed to use head-to-head if you think that all else is even. And that won't be the case. So are we going to pretend on November 2nd that the committee is not ultimately going to put Ohio State ahead of Oregon? Are they going to pretend right now that Cincinnati is a more complete team than Ohio State? I mean, I don't care what they do on Tuesday night, and I know that it's designed to get us talking about it and worked up, and I am sitting here, and I guess I already am, but I'm trying to make the point that if there was a consistent use of their guidelines and thinking from week to week, then you can put more stock in it. But I don't know what they're going to do this week because they've never consistently done that at any point throughout the history of this organization.
You know what though is what they know and what you know, and they do this all for I almost said a bad word there, hucks and giggles. They do this for hucks and giggles because they know Ohio State is going to determine its own fate over the next 5 weeks with that finishing spate against Michigan State, Michigan, and playing a Big Ten championship game. They know Alabama and Georgia could sort itself out in a SEC championship game if, in fact, Georgia beats Alabama. All right, that takes care of Alabama. You know what I mean? If Alabama gets there, Georgia's already clinched a spot in the SEC championship game, and it's not even November yet. So talk to me, folks, about what matters. But then, and they know UC is their feel-good story. If UC wins out and Oklahoma is sitting right there, if it wins out, you got to figure. So, it's really going to be, does Ohio State win out or Michigan State win out? Either one. But if Ohio State or Michigan State wins out, that takes care of that question. If Georgia wins out, that takes care of that question. And then you got the feel-goods with University of Cincinnati, and then you got Oklahoma sitting there, which should win out. I think it's already figured out. Like you just said, this is like you reward maybe Oregon for beating Ohio State, a few weeks ago, but then Ohio State has the tougher schedule down the stretch than Oregon does. So then you can come back to that argument. You see what I'm saying? So, yeah.
That's the problem, is that if they come out in their first week and they say that the head-to-head win matters, they're setting a precedent where in 2 weeks, when they inevitably move Ohio State ahead of Oregon, and they will say, well, the body of work is different.
Yeah.
That's fine. But it's not going to be dramatically different in 2 weeks than it is right now.
Yeah.
If you already think that that's going to happen, I just think they would win so much more credibility over, and they wouldn't have to face a question, well, what changed this week? If you had Oregon ahead for 2 or 3 weeks, or I don't know if that's going to be the case when this comes up 12 hours from now, but
I don't either.
But there always will be something that they do that they set a precedent that this committee, we're going to learn what this group of 12 people, how it's different than the years past. We're going to understand what they value. No, you're not. You're going to understand what they did for week 1, but in 2 weeks, they're going to throw it all away and do something else that doesn't make any sense. And then they're going to have to answer questions about why 2 weeks it is and now 2 weeks is completely different. Like, I don't know. I just throw my hands up and say, why are we doing this?
Well, pretty much the answer they always give is, well, just because. I mean, they have other words after that, but you just think back to 2014, Ohio State beats Wisconsin. What was it, 59-0? Are you kidding me? In the championship game to erase that Virginia Tech memory, and then TCU, I think it was TCU was left out, right? But bottom line was, now Gary Patterson's out of a job at TCU. Who knows what that would have meant to his resume? And of course, they had a lot of problems after that didn't even talk about football. But yeah, I mean, they can make any argument they want. This is just purely a ratings play and a relevance play and all this kind of stuff. The only thing that is good about this, though, is it gives guys like me and you a chance to see what they are thinking, and the fans to see what they are thinking, what they're claiming matters. But they're going to hedge everything too. They have to, man. College football's so crazy this year. I was talking about best case scenarios for college football finishing the way you think it could be. I mean, Houston's one of the hottest teams out there. Is Cincinnati going to handle Houston at the end of the year in an AAC championship game? I mean, there are all kinds of things that are going to happen that are going to alter what we're thinking. But then again, those things may not happen. So then we're going to be reverting back to what you said on November the 2nd. Well, yeah, Oregon winning head-to-head mattered, but on December the whatever, will it matter? I mean, that's what's crazy about it. Of course, everybody out there knows that. They just like to argue about it.
And I think that's one problem with, I mean, I don't know. I feel like I shouldn't even say this because we were about to end the podcast, but when they talk about the expansion efforts and the deal coming, the television deal contracts coming to market, and like trying to get Fox involved or trying to get NBC or CBS or anybody else to broadcast the games, one of the issues that you have with ESPN controlling all of it is that they can incentivize and encourage these selection shows because it's all on their air. So the fact that we all have to talk about it and tune in and then debate about it, and ESPN just laughs all the way to the bank about it. If it was on various networks, would they all agree we're going to do this 6 times? We're going to designate Tuesday night and we're going to broadcast it. Pay to do this and sell ads for it. But who gets to do that and where does it go? I would hope that it would just go away. You don't have to say anything if you're these 12 people until the day after the championships.
Yeah.
We can all speculate and know who's probably in position to do it, but the weekly updates at this point are not accomplishing anything except making money for everybody else.
Yeah.
Not even on the field. And that's the part that sucks to me because there's no actual value to it.
Well, here's the media, and it's in a cage. It's like tigers in a cage, and it's just them throwing meat into the cage. That's what they're throwing meat into the cage and letting everybody get all upset or happy about it. And because the one guy got the meat, but the other guy didn't, and he's fighting this guy. And that's all it is, man. It's meat in the cage.
It sounds like, even just saying it out loud feels hypocritical because obviously I will have a column about it on Tuesday night.
Yeah.
We will be referencing these rankings moving
forward.
Let
me interrupt you, and I will retweet it. I will retweet it immediately. Go ahead now.
And we've talked about it now. We weren't even planning to talk about it, and we've talked about it for 10 minutes on this podcast, and the rankings aren't even out yet.
Yeah.
So
you bet it's in the beer, but go ahead.
Hey, preach. We've covered college football for a long time.
Yeah.
And I said it before and I will say it again, that the debate, the fact that it's unwieldy and chaotic and difficult to understand at times is part of what makes it great. And if we just have to, bite our lip and embrace debate, so be it.
And it beats this system, as flawed as it is, and whatever you want to call it, beats the hell out of wire service championships. Give me a break, man. I grew up in that era, and I could probably start a fire here if I wanted to about one in particular year, but I won't do that because most of the coverage I do, whatever people like or dislike Ohio State football, so I'm going to leave it at that. But awesome, man. Appreciate you being on with me again. As you well know, man, this is another little bit of a bumpy flight, but we got through it because we have veterans at the controls. And sorry about the coffee getting spilled in your lap there, but that's the way it goes sometimes on these flights. And I definitely appreciate Joshua Perry. But you know what? Speaking for Awesome Ward, this is Tim May. Until next week, we'll see you then.